Hey gang, make sure you have out your stem cell note guide. I don't know if you can see it. For this video. So we just learned about mitosis, and in mitosis a cell divides to make two daughter cells with identical DNA. So essentially in mitosis on your answer sheet, a cell divides to make two identical daughter cells. So my question to you is, how do we get different cell types? Your body has over 100 different cell types, like cells in your kidney, cells in your liver, bone cells, lung cells, neurons in your brain. These cells all look very different, and they all do very different types of things to help your body function. So if meiosis always gives you two identical cells, then how do we get all of these? So quick review of some vocabulary. And thanks to mitosis, all the cells in your organism, in an organism, have the same DNA. So if you were thinking, well, maybe those different types of cells have different DNA, no, they don't. They're all the same. Your blood cells, your bone cells, and your skin cells all have the same DNA. In other words, they all have the same genes. So remember that a gene is a physical region of DNA, so it's like an actual spot on your DNA that codes for a particular molecule, usually a protein. So a gene is the instructions for a certain protein or molecule. And so all the cells in your body have the exact same DNA, but they can become different by changing how they use that DNA. Now, the process by which cells become specialized for different functions, meaning they get really good at a certain job, that process is called differentiation. I think we're on number 5 right now, so if you need to pause and catch up, go ahead. Differentiation is that process of a cell becoming specialized for a specific function or a certain job. So it's this process of differentiation that allows a growing organism like a baby or even a teenager like you to create new cells. So a growing baby in a mom's tummy is creating heart cells. It's creating those nerve cells. It's making all these new cells that have really unique jobs. And again, all of those cells have the same genes, but only some are expressed. So that's a good vocab word. Expressed means to be actively used. So for number 6, that's your answer. And then this is just a little cartoon. This guy saying, yeah, I know it's weird, but this is how they express themselves. So here's a different version of DNA expression. So the reason this happens is that there are special proteins that interact with the genes, the different parts of your DNA, that can turn them off or on. So these are called regulatory proteins, and they can attach to a gene and tell it to turn off. Basically, it's saying, don't make that protein. We don't need that in this cell. Or they might turn a different gene on and say, hey, I'm a cell in your stomach, and I need to be able to make enzymes to digest food, so I need this enzyme, turn it on. So when a cell goes through mitosis and divides, the two new daughter cells that it makes are going to keep those same genes turned off or on, which I think is pretty cool that it can do that. So like if a skin cell divides, it's going to make two new skin cells, right? It's not going to suddenly make a stomach cell or a bone cell. It's going to keep those same genes on, that it needs to be that type of cell. All right, so hopefully you've got number 7. All right, so stem cell is the word that we use to mean unspecialized cells. And it that means they don't have a particular job that they do. They don't perform any specific function right away. They're kind of just like a blank slate. They could become anything. So these are the cells that differentiated cells come from. So these stem cells are found early in the embryo, right? We were talking about how cells in a little baby that's growing in the mom's belly need to be able to make nerve cells, and they need to be able to make bone cells. So that's these stem cells. They can divide to make more of themselves, make more stem cells, or they can divide and the new cells can differentiate, become specialized cells by turning on or off different genes. And the stem cells aren't only found in babies, but they're also found in you and in adults, because if we get a cut on our skin, we need to be able to make new skin cells, or if we break a bone, we need to be able to make new bone cells. And sometimes that happens through mitosis, right? So sometimes those cells can just divide and make more. But occasionally we do need stem cells too to replace cells that are getting lost. So here's an overview of 3 different types of stem cells. So the very first ones in a developing embryo are called totipotent. And these are really cool because they can really become anything. So some of them will become the cells that form the placenta and the umbilical cord, and some of them will become part of the embryo. So that's totipotent, and they only exist like right at the beginning of an embryo when there's just a few cells in there. Say hi to Meadow. That's my daughter.
Hello.
So after totipotent cells differentiate a little bit, they become pluripotent. So they'll make a decision at some point whether they're becoming placenta or whether they're becoming part of the embryo. And once they've made that decision, then they're pluripotent. Pluripotent cells can become any part of a developing embryo. They can make any of the body cells. And then throughout development, those will differentiate a little bit more and become more specialized. So through a few rounds of division and specialization, they'll become multipotent cells, which are specific to a type of tissue. So there are hematopoietic stem cells. That word means like has to do with your blood. So these are blood stem cells, basically. They can become any type of blood cell. There are neural stem cells that can become any type of cell in your nervous system, so like neurons or the cells that help out with your neurons. This one says mesenchymal. That's another fancy word for connective tissue. So these types of stem cells can become bone cells or cartilage cells or any sort of supportive tissue in your basically your connective tissue there. So multipotent cells are what we have in our bodies, and they are specific to a type of tissue. So they hang out in a certain tissue, and they have the genes that are needed to make cells related to that tissue, right? A tissue is a group of cells that all kind of have a common purpose, and so these are the specialized stem cells that stay true to that type of tissue. So these guys can't suddenly become, like our bone stem cells can't suddenly become nerves or blood cells. They're going to stay in there with their type. All right, so hopefully you have the rest of the questions on your note guide written down. Totipotent can form anything, embryo or placenta. Pluripotent can form anything in the embryo. Multipotent can only make cells of its type of tissue. And once again, our stem cells are multipotent after we're born. So that helps with regeneration. Blood cells are constantly needing to be made. So we've got stem cells for our blood. There's special little stem cells like in our digestive system. Those cells are constantly having to be replaced. So there's stem cells that are constantly dividing and differentiating to become different parts of our digestive system. So when you hear stem cells, it's not always just you're going to be talking about embryonic stem cells. we have them all over the place as well. All right. Take a pause here and flip over your worksheet. And actually, I drew, I don't think you can see that, but I drew a thing on the back that's kind of a map of stem cells differentiating. So actually, I'm going to go back to this slide, and you can pause it here. So fill in the blanks of the different names of the stem cells at the different levels. When you are done with that, your next assignment is going to be the planaria lab. So I'm going to go over it real quick with you so you have an idea of what you're doing. So in our body, I told you that we only have multipotent stem cells. So that kind of limits our ability to regenerate new tissues. Like if we get an arm cut off, we might be able to heal over the wound with some skin, but we can't regrow an arm like a lizard can. And the real champions of regeneration are these worms that are called planarians, and they can pretty much regenerate any part of their body, which is really cool. So we're going to do a lab with them. There is a pre-lab that you're going to need to go through, but like I said, let me give you an overview. When you're ready to do this, you are going to find a little planaria worm, and you are going to move it to a petri dish like this, using a pipette. And you got to be really careful when you move these guys so that it doesn't get sucked up into the pipette, or you won't be able to get it out. You have to just keep it right at the mouth of it. You are going to grab a scalpel. You're going to cut this guy in half. You'll want to use a magnifying glass probably because they're really tiny. You're going to put each half in a different test tube and label it so you know which was which. Add a little spring water to it. Make sure you use the spring water, not the tap water, because they don't like tap water. It's got, chlorine and stuff in it. And then basically you're going to watch over a couple of weeks as these guys regrow. And the reason they can do that is because they don't just have multipotent stem cells, they actually retain some of their pluripotent stem cells. So they'll be able to grow back more than just the tissue that's right here. They'll be able to grow, like the stem cells that are here in the middle of the body can actually regrow the tissues that you normally only find in the head, like the special eye spot tissues. So grab your pre-lab and get started on that. And then when you're ready, come and find a teacher and we'll help you get started on your lab.